What is going on, everybody? How are y'all doing? Welcome to a late night logical, plausible, probable after show. Actually, it's not late night. Usually I'm doing late night. I'm so used to doing late night. Actually getting one done a little bit earlier because Otangelo and Dr. Danny Boy got done a little bit faster earlier than I thought they would, and realized I actually had some time to do a short after show. So welcome, everybody. You can do a little dialogue, potentially open mic about what just went down over on Creation Myths, which is Dr. Danny Boy Stern Cardinal's channel, where he and Otangelo were discussing the premise of irreducible complexity. And Otangelo has joined us over here tonight, as well as Will. But Otangelo, I'll give you the first word, my friend. How are you doing? How did you feel that things went with Dr. Dan tonight? Anything that really stuck out to you? You thought was controversial, or hey, you just have a difference of opinion, or he's refusing to accept, you're refusing to accept. Like, what are your thoughts about what happened tonight over in your conversation with Dr. Dan?
Yes, hello, John. Hello, everyone. Well, I would say it was a little bit frustrating because he didn't object my examples, and I was expecting actually that he would try to do that. But the two examples that he brought up, I don't know these, so I couldn't object them either. So basically, there was no confrontation. Of course, it wasn't about having a confrontation, but actually to make a point which the other side could accept. But I mean, he just saying, okay, I give you that. The examples that you gave, they seem to be indeed irreducibly complex, but he didn't basically even grasp the implication of this. Once that you actually acknowledge that the system is irreducibly complex, that has huge consequences. Once you admit that, that means that evolution is not the driving mechanism, and the only alternative is intelligent design. And then you have to permit God into the house, and of course, then is not willing to do that. So basically, he missed entirely the point and the consequences. Once that he admits that the two examples which I gave, which is Mycoplasma mobile, which is a small bacteria, but in special, the oxygen evolving complex of photosynthesis, if that cannot be the product of evolution, then basically the card house of evolution entirely falls down, because photosynthesis is basically essential for all advanced life forms on Earth to exist. And if that system cannot be the product of evolution, but must have been designed because it is irreducibly complex, then basically he has admitted that God exists.
Well, I don't know if he would admit that God exists or not, but I obviously I follow your premise and your logic there. It makes total sense to me. But what I really find fascinating, especially in the initial piece, he was bringing up like Behe's Darwin's Black Box, for example, and saying, "Oh, well, he doesn't go into he acted like Behe wrote it from the perspective of Charles Darwin, 1860, and obviously he did not write it from that direct perspective. But then, more importantly, this is what really fascinates me about Dr. Danny Boy is he always tries to make these dialogues specifically about making whoever he's talking with defend somebody else rather than take things prima facie in relation to what is being presented by the person he's having direct dialogue with. But if he wants to keep up bring up things like Behe, then and talk, they say, oh, he's not bringing up extended modern synthesis and all these different things. Has Danny Boy not read Darwin Devolves? I mean, because I'm pretty sure Behe went into rather direct detail about the difference, about Evo Devo, and all these different things that have been being created to attempt to explain the conundrums that are being faced by people such as Danny Boy. And yet he tries to act like somehow that doesn't exist because it wasn't something that was directly addressed necessarily in Darwin's Black Box in 1996. Does that make sense?
Well, John, it seems that he thinks that incorporating and bringing to the table all these other epigenetic mechanisms, which are playing a crucial role in making complex organisms, that somehow plays into his hands. It's actually the contrary, because once that you admit that all these languages and codes, epigenetic codes beyond genes, play an essential role in how organisms are made and formed and become complex, then you have to account for all that complexity as well. And how do you do that? I mean, then you have much more to explain. And we know that these different languages and codes, they work in an integrated fashion together. So there are codes of one kind of code, there is other kind of codes, and somehow they can interact together. It's not only that one epigenetic language can interact with signaling and so forth, but they are also cross-talking. And that brings the complexity of multicellular organisms to a completely new level. And we are talking here about integrated complexity where all these languages crosstalk with each other and have so many functions, and to claim that all this kind of complexity can be the result of evolutionary pressures, that is simply insane.
Yeah, it's like atheist like logic is like, you ask them, do you believe a car could build itself, by no intelligent design? They're like, of course not. Do you believe something, far more complex could build itself as a cell? Of course, yes. I mean, where's the logic there?
Well, I think a big portion of this, and Otangelo, you and I were talking about this the other day. I really, and very intriguingly, Otangelo, last night, I don't know if you caught this, but Mr. PhD himself admitted he doesn't understand, or he doesn't have much knowledge on the translation process. I don't know if you picked up on that last night in that after show. But he directly stated he didn't know much about what was happening in translation. When he was, irony of ironies, I think it was Speed of Pudding asked him about translational pausing. And Danny Boy admitted he didn't know anything about that. And then continued on to say he didn't know much about translation. I find it extraordinarily fascinating that a professor, a PhD, who runs around claiming that we don't know what the heck we're talking about, A, doesn't know what translational pausing is, B, admits he doesn't really know that much about one of the most fundamental components of protein synthesis, and C, something that is a fundamental requirement for life to exist. And then D, he is being granted the privilege of educating people on the subject of biological systems, when per his own admission, he doesn't really know all that much about it. And I think, let's go where I'm at, D. Let's go to E. I don't know if you've noticed this, but I have. He also always goes to things about from a virology perspective, which obviously that is his area of expertise. It's like, wait a minute. So you're focused on viruses, which I'm not saying they're the simplest component that we're discussing here, but a virus is nowhere in the same stratosphere as a full-scale cell, right? In terms of what we're talking about in relation, heck, even a membrane, right? In terms of what we're talking about and what is actually irreducibly complex, right? And even though you could argue that the sequence of a virus in and of itself still fundamentally has the that enigma on the coding side, but I'm just like, man, so is Dr. Danny Boy the walking epitome of what we've talked about many times, which is our quote-unquote experts in academia becoming so hyper-focused on their little microcosm that they don't actually know what the heck they're talking about from a macro view. And therefore, they spew talking points about everything other than their little niche and just operate from the perspective that their buddies must have checked this out. Which, irony of ironies, is why Michael Behe ended up writing Darwin's Black Box in the first place, was he also was operating from the same assumption and then went and did the research for himself. Does that long-winded diatribe, that make sense there?
No, I mean, it was interesting that he pointed out two kind of versions of irreducible complexity. One is the hard version, the soft version, and I think that nobody's claiming that evolution doesn't exist at all. We all know that evolution up to a certain point exists, but it is in the major part a pre-programmed adaptation of organisms, and that requires to be so when life even started. And I mean, the traditionally claimed mechanisms of evolution like mutations, natural selection, and so forth, we know that these are insignificant mechanisms to explain the variations within kinds and species, and even speciation of second degree. So this is something that we acknowledge, but what we are saying is that there are systems in biology which cannot be the product of evolution, and that is in regards of basically all the major transitions that goes from unicellular to multicellular organisms, that goes to explain the 6 different carbon fixation systems, that goes from prokaryotes, or the last universal ancestor, to eukaryotes. That's a huge leap, which is unexplained. The evolution or the make of body parts like arms, legs, eyes, wings, ears, and so forth. This is all unaccounted for by evolution. And once this is acknowledged, then of course you basically acknowledge that God did it, you know. And he basically didn't oppose, but actually acknowledged. He said, yeah, of course, it's possible that the mycoplasma is irreducibly complex. And what about photons? Yeah, okay, it's possible. So, hey, once you acknowledge this, you are basically saying that God exists. And
Well,
that was
we know he exists.
and that was a little bit frustrating because he didn't get the implication of admitting that irreducibly complex systems exist in nature.
Yeah, I just like how Jonathan Wells, I think it's his name, he called evolution zombie science, and he goes around and the only reason why they still, like, you know, kind of accept evolution in a way, it's because it's being pushed everywhere. It's they don't allow you to think outside of evolution. It's like you're just in a laws, you can just think about evolution. It's like when I look at like my textbook, it just asks a question, you know, why does natural selection, you know, it doesn't give you, maybe it just doesn't produce evolution at all. You know, you're not evolving to new species. They just give you evolution is true. They start by that premise, and they don't give you a third option. Maybe evolution is not true. You know, it's just complete brainwash. And that's what really sad, because it destroyed a lot of people's faith.
Well, I think something else that has to be directly recognized is, you know, what we are observing as, from the Evo perspective, as, you know, observable proof of evolution. We're actually observing real-time data input, then having a variation output that is dependent upon pre-existing capacity. Like that's what we're observing in real time. And it's as a result of the ridiculous amount of sensors that literally engulf every single cell in your body, that enable information input to run through an information processing system to execute command prompts. Like, this is exactly what's happening. And this is recognized as what's happening. And I'm like, we're observing real time adaptation as a result of pre-existing, to your point, pre-programmed capacity.
Yeah.
Machine learning is a dynamic system. It is exactly what we are attempting to create right now in our technology. And anybody who says otherwise is an ignorant fool. What we are observing as our own observational technology grows, and we even have the capacity to observe it, let alone even know that something, even consider the premise that I'm talking about now, to look for it in a biological system. Up until very recently, the concepts that I'm talking about right now were so far outside of our capacity, we didn't even know to look for them in biological systems.
Exactly.
Now we know to start looking for this kind of thing. And what do we keep finding? Stuff that blows your mind. And people such as Danny Boy freely admit he doesn't know how some of the basics work, or he hasn't gone and researched it. Really? So you're sitting here telling me that you're telling kids, they're freshmen and sophomore years in college, how biological systems work, while under your own admission, you don't know what the hell you're talking about. And you have a PhD, and I'm supposed to respect you?
Wait, he has a PhD?
Yeah, Dr. Danny Boy is a PhD in virology. He's an evolutionary biologist. He's an assistant teaching professor at Rutgers University. He teaches 115 and 116, biology 115, 116.
You gotta be, dude, like this.
He is a teaching professor at a major institution, academic institution in the United States of America.
Oh man,
this is why I call him out so much, and I call it this crap. And I'm like,
that's
what are we talking?
Bullshit.
But you know, John.
Danny Boy. The link's in the description if you want to come on in, bro.
I think what we have to give to him, that he actually is open to have a dialogue, but there are so many others like him which are not willing to do that. And you see that I have expanded my mailing list to 150 PhDs, and nobody of those are springing in to join the conversation. And I think that has to be also to be credited to him, that he is open to show his face, to defend what he believes and so forth. And I think that's good.
Yeah, I had a question for you about. I've seen a video from Michael Behe, and he was kind of explaining they did like a bacteria experience, like the E. coli 10 or something like that, and they like reproduced for 1.5 million years of evolution, and they thought that they had like seen beneficial mutation, but actually lost information to survive. Have you guys ever heard about that?
Yeah, they have 70,000 generations, and what they still have is bacteria, basically.
But didn't they even lose information?
Well, I don't know the details of that. But I know that basically they continue to be bacteria. So
they should have changed it to something else.
That alone says a lot.
Shouldn't it have like changed to something else in like 1.5 years? 1.5 million years?
In theory, yeah.
But it happened in their imagination.
I'm interested to see if Danny Boy ends up coming in. They were talking mad game the other day when I was busy in that after show, just listening.
No, I think, John, my conversation was nice with Dan. As I pointed out, the only thing is that surprises me that he seems not to see the implications. If he acknowledges that even a part of biological systems are irreducibly complex, that means these systems cannot evolve, and that means that a creator is the only alternative explanation. Exactly. And that's a big admission. If he admits that, that's a big admission. But I'm not sure if he actually understood the implications if he admits that.
Well, if he comes on, we can ask him that question directly, I guess.
Yeah.
He asked you a question in chat, Maddox. He says, what John's talking about?
What's up, Danny Boy? How you doing?
Good evening. How's everybody doing?
I'm doing good.
I saw you were doing this, and they tell me in the chat it was an open mic. So what the heck, right?
Yeah. So then, My question, which I was just asking now, is this: once you acknowledge that there are irreducibly complex systems in nature, and I mentioned just two, but there are many more, like the mycoplasma walking or the photosynthesis, but I can bring many examples. If you acknowledge this, then you are basically admitting God into the house. And I'm not sure. Yeah, that's exactly my point. You are not seeing that, and I
guess
don't
I'm not.
understand why.
Well, so the reason why is, I think, Otangelo, I think we're able to agree that based on Behe's criteria, we agreed on a set of criteria for irreducible complexity, and I think we agreed that there are some systems that meet those criteria that we have observed evolving. So those criteria, in and of themselves, meeting those criteria, are not a barrier per se to a system evolving. And that means that that falsifies the strong version of the irreducible complexity hypothesis, the version of that
I've never
hypothesis
seen
that says,
Behe making two versions. He has basically just one argument.
Well, I agree, but we agreed at the beginning of our conversation a little while ago that if you go kind of textually through Behe's argument, he actually, you know, the way he says it is a little bit weird and doesn't actually cover a lot of evolutionary processes. So it's more reasonable, given the fact that he's making a broadly anti-evolution argument. It's reasonable to interpret the argument he's making as the strong version that I proposed, which is to say, if a system meets the definition, meets his criteria for irreducible complexity, then that system necessarily cannot evolve. That's the strong version of that hypothesis, and that's testable. The way you would test that, because the prediction that makes is, therefore, we cannot observe the evolution of a system that meets those criteria. And the point that I don't know, John, did you watch our conversation?
I watched about the first half, and I was in and out.
All right. So my point throughout this conversation is that we've observed a bunch of systems evolve that meet Behe's criteria, which means that if you go by the strong version of his hypothesis, right, the maximalist version, anything that meets these criteria cannot evolve, right? Multiple parts necessary. If you remove one, it doesn't work. No intermediate functionality.
Hang on. You just made a strong assertion. Hang on. You just made a strong assertion that we have observed these things evolve.
Yeah. Oh yeah, and Otangelo.
What entire? Okay. Please name some.
I'll give you three off the top of my head.
We've observed in real time.
Tethering antagonism by HIV group 1 VPU, HIV 1 group M VPU, placental evolution in lizards, and endosymbiosis, specifically secondary endosymbiosis in animals. Those are three specific observed examples of traits that are irreducible.
No, I have no problem to acknowledge that these systems might be the product of evolution.
Exactly.
But that doesn't falsify irreducible complexity.
It falsifies the second version of the argument. The second version, the strong version. We agreed on that, I think.
Hang on a second here. Do you have, in all of those scenarios, do you already have pre-existing function?
No, that's the point, right? Lizards don't have placentas. HIV VPU never had the HIV 1 group M VPU.
Did the HIV group M VPU, whatever that one is, did it already exist?
No.
No, there wasn't something it came from.
There's no evolutionary history of animals having chloroplasts. Like that's new. And we're observing it right now happening, where animals are actually acquiring chloroplasts. And we can look at animals right now, and we could look at those same populations going back decades, and we can see that they have stronger associations now than they did then. Like we're watching it happen in real time.
Where do you go from that then? Where do you go from that? Now,
I can answer you. If I can take like 2 minutes, I can give you a very straightforward answer to what Otangelo. Where do you go from that? What's the point? Why does that matter? It matters because the trait and I think we should all be able to agree, and Otangelo and I started our conversation by agreeing on the definition of irreducible complexity. We agreed what those criteria are. And something like an organelle, like a chloroplast, right? Endosymbiosis, that's irreducibly complex. You need gene transfer, you need membranes to be compatible, you need, like, you go through a dozen different things you need in order for a cell to eat like a cyanobacterium, and then instead of digesting it, acquire it and use it to make energy for itself. That's an irreducible trait, according to Behe's definition. So the point of saying we could observe the process of endosymbiosis happening in real time, which we can do that, we're doing that right now in animals which have no history in their evolution of any association with these photosynthetic organisms, right? So this is brand new. We're observing this happening right now. If we could observe the evolution of an irreducible trait, then that falsifies the hypothesis that if a trait has irreducible complexity, if it meets the criteria for irreducible complexity, then, children, everybody remember your if-then statements from high school biology, right? That's what hypothesis is, right? It's actually a prediction, but whatever. If it meets the criteria, then it cannot evolve. The way to falsify that hypothesis is to identify features that meet those criteria that we're observing evolving. And we've done that multiple times. Therefore, the strong version, absolutist version of that hypothesis is...
Okay, so when are you saying that this all started? When did we start observing this?
When did we start what?
When did we observe these chloroplasts in animal cells?
Oh, decades. I mean, you go back through samples probably... I don't know how far back the samples go, but at least decades we've been observing the populations. And it's there's a species of hydra that's doing it. There's a worm that's doing it, a flatworm. There's I think it's a nudibranch is doing it. That's what group is a nudibranch? That's a mollusk. There's a bunch of different groups. There's actually a bivalve. I think it's a scallop relative that's doing it. And then there's primary endosymbiosis going on in the genus Pollinella, which is an amoeboid rhizarian group. So it's not even that there's like one example of this. There's like a dozen different examples of this. You Google photosynthetic animals, you can find animals that actually transmit the organelles in their germline. So you have like eggs that are green. You find other animals that actually eat it. So it's not a persistent association, but they actually have photosynthetic genes in their nuclear genome from gene transfer. And what we see is that within these species, over the decades we've been watching them, you're seeing progression of association, where in the past, maybe you didn't have the genes and now you do, or you didn't have germline transmission and now you do. So we're seeing the process happen in real time, but these are traits that by any reasonable assessment meet Behe's criteria. So the point is, you end up falling back on what I call the weak version of the hypothesis, which is to say that there are some systems that meet the criteria that can evolve, and there are other systems that meet the criteria that cannot evolve.
Okay, so Danny Boy, you've done a very long-winded diatribe about
one sentence.
You've been on a long-winded diatribe. You've been on a long-winded diatribe for the last 5 minutes. Not anything you've talked about is like the fundamental requirements for these functions you're talking about are already in place. They already exist. We're talking, yeah.
Specifically for
are you suggesting that? Are you suggesting
GPU? It's not. No.
No.
We're not.
We're talking about chloroplasts right now, correct?
There's nothing about the association that's pre-existing.
Can you prove that it was not?
Yeah, because we look at other animals that don't have any of the photosynthesis genes in their genome. The only ones that have them are the ones that have the chloroplasts.
Right. Did you look at the ancestors of...
Or specifically plastids. It's not chloroplast, strictly speaking, but whatever.
But you have to explain the origin of oxygenic photosynthesis in the first place.
Sorry, there were two questions
my question was, what do you do about those systems which are irreducibly complex indeed, because they could not have evolved?
Well, so that's Otangelo. That's the disagreement that we're having, because what I'm saying is that the hypothesis that if irreducible complexity then could not evolve that hypothesis is false. It is not universally true because we have observed systems that meet the criteria evolving. We've observed them in real time evolving.
I think there is some passing at each other in regards of the definition. And I said right in the beginning, if you have a system which can evolve, then it is by definition not irreducibly complex. A system that is irreducibly complex cannot be explained by evolutionary mechanisms.
So you're going by the third version of the hypothesis,
whatever right? you call it first, second, whatever. I mean, but that is what Behe says. Yeah, but that's what Behe says.
Okay, so the weak version is not falsifiable, though. We should all be able to agree on that.
It is falsifiable. If you can demonstrate how oxygenic photosynthesis could have evolved, then you can say, okay, that is a system which is also not irreducibly complex. But the thing is that knockout experiments have been done, and they have shown that if you remove one of the proteins in the oxygenic evolving complex, then the system breaks down. And these subparts, they do not have any function in other systems. They are exclusively used in that system. So why would evolution produce a protein which by itself has no function unless it is incorporated in a higher system where it is indispensable?
As I said in our conversation, to not just rehash what we just talked about, so I would direct anyone who wants to hear my answer to that, go to the conversation we just had. But Otangelo, I think rather than rehash what we just talked about, would it be okay if I asked what other people thought? If anybody else had any, would that be okay with you? And John, would that be all right? Because Otangelo, not to ignore your question, but we just talked about that. So I think it's fair to say,
no, you said, okay, I'm fine with the first example. I'm fine with the second example. So if you are fine then with these two examples, what does that mean? That means that evolution is not a plausible or capable mechanism to explain the feat in question.
That's where we're not seeing eye to eye.
And that brings God into the picture.
So that's where we're not seeing eye to eye. And, thank you for kind of bringing me back and kind of centering it on that point, because that's really the critical point. And the point is, the point that you're making is irreducible complexity, therefore cannot evolve. But we agreed on the criteria. And I'll just survey people here, people in the chat. Take a system like endosymbiosis, where you need to have transfer of specific genes.
I need to provide you. Let me interrupt you. I need to provide you just one example, and your entire evolutionary system.
That's not how hypothesis testing works, my friend. This is irreducible complexity is a hypothesis. So the way hypothesis testing works is you're making a logical statement, right? You're saying if A, then B, right? If we could find a single example of not B, that means A is invalid. So if we can observe a system that meets the criteria of irreducible complexity, if we can observe that system evolving, that invalidates the hypothesis that subsystems are incapable of evolving. That's how hypothesis testing works. And my point, and I'll shut up for however long, I think other people should get in, but my point is that we have observed the evolution of such systems repeatedly. It's not a one-off thing. We've observed, we got lizards evolving placentas. We've got endosymbiosis happening in half a dozen different species of animals. We've got HIV evolving a new protein function that involves molecular interactions.
You said that the third time we have all heard you saying that. So let me answer to that.
Sure, say your answer, and then if other people want to get in.
Danny Boy, stop talking over Otangelo. We've been letting you talk, man.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Otangelo.
I would say that the origin of life, the first cell, is irreducibly complex. That points to God. You require a minimal number of genes. You require energy. You require information. You require the basic building blocks of life. And if any of those is missing, you have no life. So God is necessary. To go from a leuca to eukaryotic cells, which the claim is endosymbiosis, which is bunk for several reasons, that's also not possible. To go from prokaryote from unicellular to multicellular lives, you need several parts, and if you don't have that all at once, you do not have the transition. So you have also there irreducible complexity. Like you need signaling systems, cell-cell signaling, you need the cell adhesion molecules, both all at once. And if one is missing, you cannot have that transition. And you mentioned, and we agree on that to have complex life forms, you need a lot of epigenetic information. And that is actually something that you have to account for. And evolution simply is not adequate explanation, because languages and codes, they do not come about by evolutionary unguided mechanisms. You require intelligence to set up languages and codes and information and translation systems and ciphers and all that biosemiotic stuff. So all that points to the necessity of an intelligent designer.
Can I just say something real quick, if you guys don't mind?
Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, like, I'm a Christian, but if like someone were to present me that and I was an atheist, I would kind of reject it in a way, because we don't know everything about the past, so there could be certain stuff that we don't know today. So atheists could just reject that it's necessary for God to create, complex stuff in a way. So I don't think that would be the best argument in a way.
Well, it's basically the argument for intelligent design is that the incredulity required, or I guess the credulity required to believe that the probabilistic problems of abiogenesis were somehow overcome without any sort of intelligence guiding them, is what lends somebody to intuitively believe that somebody did it. Which, of course, doesn't necessarily get you God. In fact, if you're
Exactly
Richard Dawkins, then you would go, "Oh, aliens did it."
Exactly. An atheist could just reject that like premise one. It could just say, it could be an alien, it could be something laws we don't know, or something it had in the past that we're not currently know of, or like even a meteor or something like that. It could be everything. But I just personally, from my personal point, I would say the best is an intelligent design. But atheists could just reject that premise, and it's just how it is.
And they do. But it's the thing is you've got to get somebody to listen to you in or you have to be able to have a conversation with somebody long enough to go beyond just the incredulity of abiogenesis. You got to get. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that there are all these walls that are built up from a child that is raised in an atheist home, or say a Christian that goes to college, and they get told all these things that confuse them and lead them to doubt the Bible, and then you have to answer all those questions. So this is this is probably one of my favorite arguments is abiogenesis, but you can't have it be your only one,
Yeah, I think there's a lot of problem for evolution, but there's a lot of problem for creationism too. There's problem on two sides, and I think what scientists are gonna look to do is resolve there on both sides, and one day we're gonna see the side that has the more answer, and we'll go from there.
Does anybody have a comment on the actual structure of the irreducible complexity hypothesis in terms of strong versus weak version? Anybody have a position on which one you adhere to, whether it's testable? Anybody have thoughts on that?
Can you clarify the difference between the strong and the weak?
Yeah. So the strong version of the hypothesis is that if you can identify a system that meets the criteria for irreducible complexity, which in our chat, Otangelo helpfully quoted Behe. It's, several necessary parts all working towards a function. If you remove anyone, the function is gone. There's no stepwise pathway. Like Behe gives a bunch of conditions. Yeah. If the strong version of the hypothesis is if you meet those conditions, then the system absolutely 100% cannot evolve. The weak version of the hypothesis is that if you meet those conditions, maybe it can evolve, but there's examples that meet those conditions that cannot. So it's maybe it can, but some can't. Right? That's the weaker version. So what I would love to hear,
the weaker version is
I'd love to hear what people think.
technically true, because technically it is possible for I don't know, a human to give birth to a fish. It's technically possible.
Probably not.
I don't know. It's not plausible. It's not probable. We're talking about a technicality here, which is one of the things that you may be leaning on, is that, yeah, it seems so incredibly, crazily improbable, but it's technically possible, and we see something that we think looks like what we're talking about, so we're going to jump on that and say, okay, this is our proof. Which is why I asked you if you looked at the ancestors of that species.
Yeah. Can I clarify a small point?
Mm-hmm.
So when I ask about this, the reason I want to make that distinction is twofold. One is that like irreducible complexity is one of like the old school intelligent design arguments, and the point is to make it like a scientifically testable idea, right? And so in order to work, it has to follow the rules of a scientific hypothesis. It has to be falsifiable. And the reason that distinction matters between the strong and the weak is that the strong version is falsifiable, right? If you can find an exception, then you falsified it. The weak version is not falsifiable, because you could always say, well, there's this other thing that can't evolve, even if you get to watch one specific thing that meets the criteria evolving. You could always say, well, we haven't seen that thing evolve, or we haven't seen this other thing evolve. The second reason that I think that matters is I don't lean on hypotheticals as you describe them. When I'm approaching this hypothesis, I'm just working on what we've directly observed. Like, we could watch new traits evolve, like complex traits, like lizards evolving placentas in real time, animals evolving, not chloroplasts technically, but photosynthetic organelles. We're watching this happen in real time. And the question is, those traits, I think it's reasonable to conclude that, like, placental gestation in utero, I think that meets the criteria. Which means, because
I didn't hear the last part.
That which version you adhere to matters, given that I think we actually do fulfill the criteria to falsify the strong.
Wait, do you think evolution by natural selection specifically is falsifiable?
Oh, evolution by any mechanism you want. There are so many different ways that could be falsified.
How do you falsify natural selection as a theory?
So let's draw a distinction between could falsify and could have falsified, right? Because for a lot of this stuff, the ship has sailed because we did the test, and evolution by...
Let's pretend we have a time machine.
Okay, let's pretend we had a time machine. Let's pretend it's 1859, right? How would we falsify evolution by natural selection? If there was a mechanism for faithfully replicating DNA, if every population was exactly identical genetically, like within a population, you had phenotypic variation, but no heritable genetic variation. If you had a situation where there was no association between genotype and phenotype, if you had a situation where...
Wait, I thought you must be talking... I'm not talking about evolution simpliciter, right? I'm just talking about evolution by natural selection. Well, what do you take natural selection to be? Let's just make sure we're talking about the same thing.
Natural selection is when you have differential survival and reproduction within a population based on specific heritable traits. And those traits then become more frequent over generations.
That's not explanatory.
That is explanatory. That's literally the mechanism.
You're just described something.
Yeah, that's the
mechanism. It's a tautology, but it's true.
So can I just address the tautology point for a second? Because there's a common misunderstanding here. So the phrase that people claim is a tautology is survival of the fittest. Raise your hand if you've heard that phrase and go, aha, that's a tautology. In that phrase, what they're describing is not individuals, right? So they're not saying the individuals most likely to survive to adulthood survive. That's not what they're saying. The person who came up with that phrase, and then Darwin subsequently adopted it, the person who came up with that was describing traits. And what that phrase actually refers to is the persistence over generations of traits that provide a reproductive advantage within a population.
Okay, wait. All those words aside, is it's still just stating what. Now, how do you? Like,
so could you? So
are you stating that this is not true? That natural selection is not true?
No, it's absolutely.
No, sorry. Survival of the fittest.
No, so survival of the fittest is accurate. It's just important to be clear on what that phrase means, and it's typically meant to apply to individuals, right? Survival of the fittest individuals. What it actually means from like 1865 or whatever, when it was first coined, what that phrase actually means is that it refers to the fittest traits, right? The traits that are most adaptive within a population. It's not talking about individuals. It's talking about characteristics.
Yeah, but it must talk about individuals because on a level, because
the guy who
you have a trait, but you also have, if you have a good trait and a bad trait, but the good trait is more profitable to survival and reproduction, then that individual is going to be more likely to propagate his DNA.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
And because of that, because the beneficial trait outweighs the detriment of the bad trait, it continues to be a problem.
It can, right, so that beneficial trait is going to become more frequent and is more likely to persist over time.
But that's a tautology.
The detrimental trait is more likely, I should say, to be lost from that population.
Sure,
so
that's what I was talking about.
Isn't that why is that not tautological?
It's not tautological because it's talking about traits. It's not talking about individuals surviving. Like we're using, maybe we're getting hung up on the word fitness.
I think you just don't like the word. I mean, it's not necessarily an insult to say something that is a tautology.
Wait, before we move on, if you do agree that if it's tautological, it's unfalsifiable.
I'd have to see the logic on that. I'm not sure.
Because the thing is that what it means to say that something's a tautology is that it's always true.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, the first rule of Tautology Club is the first rule of Tautology Club. Yeah.
Yeah. So if it's always true, then there's no observation that can disconfirm it.
Sure.
Okay, so therefore it's unfalsifiable if some proposition or theory is unfalsifiable. Okay. Now, when you said something like a beneficial trait, okay, has a higher likelihood of propagating in a future generation.
No, it's specifically not that. It's not that it has a higher likelihood. It's that it actually does, in practice, propagate more.
Well, that's
describing
still just as problematic.
The way you just said it is a tautology because the definition of fitter is more likely to. But what survival of the fittest is describing is not the probability of what happens. It's describing what actually happens.
The problematic word there is beneficial, not fit.
It's the same thing.
Beneficial refers to fitness in an evolutionary sense.
Okay, so what you mean by benefit is just something like fit, right?
Improves reproductive success. Yeah.
Okay, so can you repeat then how you phrased it because I'm not understanding?
The way I actually do this in class is I break down the sentence little bit by little bit. And actually, you know what, John, may I share my screen? Can I just pull it up?
No, just explain yourself, dude. We're not going into.
No, all right, fine.
It's not a big deal.
Hang on, everybody. Danny boy, we're not going into. You're obviously you're heading at 100 miles an hour towards your. I'm going to talk down to everybody mindset.
I really don't.
And it's really freaking obnoxious when you do that. I know you think that you're Mr. Smarty Pants, but there's plenty of other smart people in this room. And so let's.
Well, it would help me.
So let's not get super arrogant.
It would help me if I just want to know what he means by natural selection, and if he's just going to show me the sentence.
It's literally one slide. It'll take me a second to pull it up, and I'll just look.
Here, just copy paste it in the private chat.
It's not. No, it's on local. It's PowerPoint. It's.
You can rewrite it on private chat. Well, I mean,
it's kind of graphical. It's just give me a second. No. Just give me one sec. Just give me 1 second, all right?
Okay.
I think he's really proud of this slide and he needs to show it.
No, I'm really not, but I think it's useful because we're
getting. Danny boy, go look for it and stop talking. Go look for it because this isn't going to be a long show.
I just want to know what he means.
I got to get up early. In the interim to him finding all that stuff, so I'm reading up on this whole chloroplast thing with some sea slugs, and
one of them sea slugs.
They're carrying out plant-like photosynthesis from eating algae that has the capacity, and they're basically creating a hybrid. Function, but they're not developing it themselves. They're taking pre-existing function.
Yeah, the trait I described.
I know. In a hybrid, in a hybrid function, right? So nothing, what I'm looking at right now, as of October 20th, 2020, nothing about this is suggesting that the slug evolved this capacity.
John, the novel trait is the endosymbiosis, not photosynthesis.
So it's the utilization of an existing function?
The trait of
So, did
having
the function pre-exist? Did the function pre-exist, yes or no?
No, the endosymbiosis is 100%.
No, did the algae that they're eating already have the functional capacity for photosynthesis, yes or no?
Yes, that's not the trait.
Okay, then.
That's not the trait we're talking about.
You literally talked about chloroplasts.
The irreducible trait is the
Chloroplasts are already in play. The chloroplasts, find your little slide. Find your little slide, and we'll come back to this. Find your little slide, and we'll come back to this. We're talking about novel function in terms of photosynthesis. You spewed photosynthesis and chloroplasts, all this kind of stuff. No, they already existed.
The novel trait.
They were already there. Wow. Man, I always knew. You have to take time. You have to go look at the bullshit.
No, you know what? Do you want the answer, John? Does anybody want to hear the answer?
Here's your little slide, Danny boy.
So first thing, the novel trait.
Danny boy, you can talk about your survival of the fittest.
Trait is the endosymbiosis, not the.
Danny boy, you're not talking about this right now. I'm letting you pull up your stupid slide, talk about your slide, then we can get back to this other thing.
Sure. The novel trait is the endosymbiont, not the.
Okay, Danny boy, if you're going to talk about this, or you're gone. You annoy the crap out of me so much, bro.
All right, you ready to hear about survival of the fittest?
Okay,
So you're saying.
So
this is the phrase. So here, I'll walk you through it all. So survival of the fittest is what it means is traits. It's not individuals, it's traits. So it's traits that provide for a reproductive advantage. Okay. So when we're talking about fitness, we're not talking about like being big and strong. We're talking about a reproductive advantage. So it's survival of traits that promote reproductive success. That's this third line here. But we're also not talking about them in terms of like one person surviving. When we say survival, what we mean in this phrase is persistence over generations. So we're talking about
it's still a tautology.
Wait, this can't be a tautology because it's not even a proposition.
This is what it describes, the part that I've highlighted. Survival within a population of traits that promote reproductive success.
That's not a proposition. That can't be. That's not.
But
That's
Danny,
not
that's
true
what it
fact.
means.
That's not
Danny,
true fact.
it's supposed to be. It's just not. He didn't. I don't think he meant to not word it as a proposition.
Well, he needs to word it as a proposition for us to know whether it's a tautology or not.
Sure, but I don't think you can do it without making it a tautology.
I might agree with you, but it's not even true or false what he just put.
It's simply describing a mechanism. That's all.
What he's saying is the last line of your slide is an incomplete sentence.
Yes.
So incomplete sentences can't
Doesn't
be
have
true
a verb.
or false.
Survival of the fittest is not a sentence either. It doesn't.
Right. But I'm interested in what describes
it's a
natural
meme.
selection. Yeah.
Survival of the fittest is a meme, right? There's a lot of information that goes into a person's brain when you say those words.
Yeah,
there's not a lot of information that goes into somebody's brain when you mention that. You made it up.
I took natural selection in like a high school textbook to be something like a process that is right.
Right.
I think the exact it goes like something like this. It's a process in which good traits are conducive to survival and reproduction, or something like that. But that's tautological.
Yeah.
It's so what this phrase is describing is what happens, right? It's survival. In other words, propagation.
The phrase that you wrote is not truth apt. I need it to put it in a propositional form.
What can I tell you? This is what I got. And
do you think what you wrote right here is true or false?
I'm simply describing what a phrase means.
Is it true or false?
Do you know what a proposition? Do you know how to formulate a proposition?
Apparently not.
Do you understand that the last sentence, the last line in your slide is not a proposition? Do you understand?
I'll take your word for it. Sure.
Okay.
Look, do you think it's true?
It doesn't have a verb for one. Well, I guess that promote is no.
Promote,
That's
a verb.
That's an
Promote's
adjective.
a verb.
Promote by itself is a verb, but
No, it
that
has no
promote,
subject.
describing traits, is an adjective. There's no verb in this sentence.
Survival. The traits that promote reproductive success survive, which is to say they persist over generations.
Survival. Look, the point is that this could be a fragment of a sentence that says something like survival within a population of traits that promotes reproductive success is a false theory. That could be that could be the proposition.
Or is a description of things that.
Yeah. So now, presumably, you're saying survival within a population of the traits that promote reproductive success is a theory or something? Is that what you?
I would call it a mechanism, because what this phrase describes is natural selection.
Okay, so then we want to say that natural selection is true, right?
I mean, yeah.
I mean, yeah.
Or is
Yeah,
that like saying
true.
is that like saying a tree is true?
No.
Yeah, I mean, natural selection is
like
true.
a tree is not true. That's a category error.
Right. Should natural selection be treated as a propositional thing, or as like some concept like tree?
It's a tautology.
Here's the logic. If you want
But it's
the
a
logic
useful
of natural selection, here it is. This is the logic of natural selection. Basically, if you have heritable variation that leads to differences in reproductive success, the traits that facilitate greater reproductive success become more common over generations.
Okay, wait. This is still problematic. Could this be true? Favorable traits decrease in frequency over time?
Favorable traits can decrease in frequency over time, but
in what sense is it favorable?
Different.
Wait, you said one slide.
It's okay.
You can take it down if you want at any point.
John might not accept it.
John can take it down if he wants.
So in what sense is it
favorable? Question, and I have the answer right here.
In what sense is it favorable if it decreases?
So traits that are beneficial that would increase frequency or increase reproduction can decrease in frequency, but it would be through a mechanism other than selection.
Okay, but we're just talking about natural selection, right? If the only mechanism in question is natural selection, right, then it would be impossible that a favorable trait would decrease.
It depends on the structure of the genome and the population. True. It depends. It's complicated.
Well, technically, what it means is that
in what sense would it be favorable?
Because if you have multiple traits, right, and it's some mix, it's the net effect that matters. That selection acts on, right?
So you can have two good traits. You can have two good traits.
Then there's a bigger problem here, because then they're ride-along traits, and I don't think natural selection is going to help you with differentiating ride-along versus the trait in question that's being selected.
That's a different question. It's more complicated than just natural selection.
But the point is that natural selection is not going to. In that case, natural selection is still not going to be explanatory.
No, natural selection in 0 cases is exclusively explanatory. There's dozens of other mechanisms that are.
No, we're just talking about a case where it is where supposedly it's explanatory.
Okay, but then you're adding conditions that make it not.
Oh, okay. Wait, but we're just taking the definition, right? That in the case where we can employ natural selection as a mechanism, then you're saying that there can't be any ride-along traits.
Oh, there absolutely are ride-along traits.
Okay, are there ride-along? Okay, well then, how does natural selection
hitchhiking.
differentiate between the ride-along trait versus the trait that's actually being selected for?
It doesn't. That's the fun part.
Well, then, but if in every case, if the ride-along traits, the natural selection can't ever be explanatory.
Well, okay, Danny. The thing is that
that's Photo's argument against natural selection.
It is complicated, but we describe it in a simple way, and so like a layman would hear this and it would make sense and it would explain the concept that we're trying to tell them. But
how is that going to be some kind of epistemic virtue?
I don't think it is. What I'm saying is that he's talking about something that everybody generally accepts.
Look, you are
trying to drill down into. I mean, you're trying to drill down into whether or not. Like, I was just making a joke about it being a tautology, and then we just spun off on this whole conversation.
You're not remembering the conversation. I asked, is natural selection falsifiable? Right? That was the original question.
Do we want to go back to that?
Why? If it was or was not, what was the point of your argument?
Because he wants to say that intelligent design is unfalsifiable, and thus should be cast out, right? So the thing is that he just admitted that in every case where there's selection, then there's some right-along trait, even if some kind of quote-unquote frivolous trait, like the heart pumps, that's a trait that's coextensive with the thump-thump noise, right? That's a right-along trait. Now, natural selection, right, is not going to be able to differentiate whether it's the thump-thump noise or the hump.
Well, let's talk about it's important to talk about
Okay,
genetic
guys,
traits,
I'm
though.
leaving. Thank you, John, for having me at the stream, and see you next time.
Hey, Otangelo, thanks for coming on.
Otangelo.
Appreciate it, Otangelo. Have a good night, man.
Otangelo.
Can I just point out that we need to distinguish between merely like descriptive traits of like the thump thump sound of your heart versus the blood pumping, and traits that are actually genetic, because what we're talking about here are heritable genetic traits, right? So when I talk about hitchhiking, I mean you have an allele that's beneficial.
Just asked a question and then kept talking.
And then linked has separate alleles that may be neutral, beneficial, harmful, whatever. If this one beneficial allele is predominating what the selection scheme looks like, then those other ones are just along for the ride. That's what I'm talking about when we're talking about hitchhiking, right?
But even so, right, if you look, let's say we're talking about the gene, right, that's that is being selected for that's responsible for the pumping of the blood, right? Okay, it's also
one gene. It's a whole,
Sure, whatever. It's
which adds to your problem.
It's polygenic, right? There's polygenic. There's a set of genes that is responsible for both the heart pumping, right, and the thump thump noise, right? Because you wouldn't have a thump thump noise if the heart didn't pump.
The thumping is okay. The thumping is a cause.
The thumping is the valve. So the thumping is just a consequence of the developmental shape of the valves. Like that's what the thumping.
Right, but the point is that that's not the phenotyping, and we're not interested in that. When we talk about but it's the thing is that it's the same. Presumably, it's going to be the same set of genes that explain that phenotype.
I see. Yeah, that makes sense. Can I ask a 30,000-foot question?
Go ahead.
Is your point to question the validity of natural selection as an explanatory mechanism for evolutionary change, or like what's the? I'm just trying.
I don't think it's explanatory.
I already asked him and he said it. He said that the point was that because natural selection is unfalsifiable. Or what was your point again? I think I was about to misrepresent what you said.
I think anything that's unfalsifiable is going to be that's one thing, right? That's the first point, right? That's problematic for scientific theories. And then the second one is I don't think that it's even explanatory.
Okay, so can we deal with the falsifiability first?
Yeah, that's fine.
So the thing about something that is unfalsifiable, it may be a problem for some people, but inevitably, real truth is unfalsifiable. If it is true, you can't
fake truth is like falsifiable? I don't understand.
I mean, like something that like 2 + 2 = 4. That's not falsifiable.
Well, that's not even a scientific
endeavor. It's falsifiable, but it's true.
It was an example.
Right.
My point is that something that
I agree with you, Eric. I agree with Eric. There are a lot of truths that are unfalsifiable. Sure, but
so may I just make my point on natural selection is this: there were ways when Darwin proposed the idea. There were many ways to evaluate the validity of that idea, right? Because when Darwin proposed the idea in 1858, technically, like we didn't know what DNA was. We didn't understand genetics. Like there were a lot of things we didn't know about biology. Had we
transitional forms found within the geological record?
Well, that's a different question. What I'm saying is
wasn't that his top reason?
It was if you read his book, there were a bunch. It was not actually. It was actually direct observations. Was what he kind of based his idea on.
I believe he did mention as one of his.
He does mention fossils, yeah.
But let's address the falsifiability.
He said that if his theory were true, then there should be countless transitional forms in the fossil record.
It seems like we're just changing the subject, right? Let's just talk about
changing the subject. Can we address the falsifiability first?
Yeah, I want to do that.
Okay. Can I would ask for like 2 minutes. I promise you I will give you an answer. Like a straightforward, here it is.
Yeah, I'm not frustrated with you. I'm not frustrated with anyone. I just want to be on topic.
So here's the thing. When Darwin did his, like in 1858, he and Wallace proposed this idea of evolution by natural selection. At that point, it was a very strongly falsifiable idea, right? And it still is. The point is, the tests of it have since been done, and it has proven to not have been false through those tests. So, like, for example, that slide that just vanished, it had heritable phenotypic variation was one of the conditions. If we had done the genetics, if Mendel had come along and found there was no heritable variation, then that would have falsified evolution by natural selection. If phenotypically everybody was identical, then that would have falsified evolution by natural selection. If there was no mechanism for getting my alleles, specifically my alleles, into my offspring.
Do you think when something goes from 0 to 100% genetic variation, there's like a 0% of a particular trait to a 100%?
Sorry, I didn't hear the very beginning of that. Sorry.
Okay, so suppose there's no population, and we get a new population with 100%, genetic similarity, or why wouldn't natural selection be explanatory in that case?
It isn't. So if you have a trait that is fixed, right? If there's an allele that is present in 100% of the individuals within a population, then natural selection is not acting on that allele, right? Because there's no heritable variation.
But if it's going from 0%.
I'm sorry?
If it's going from 0%.
Okay, so if it starts at 0, right, and then you have a mutation, now you have like a small percentage. Now you have variation, right? So you have a new allele with a new phenotype.
I don't think is that necessary? I don't know if that's necessary.
You need to have heritable phenotypic variation for selection to work.
So I think for evolution to work, right?
No, for selection,
but for natural selection to work.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I actually still, based on your last slide, I think I vaguely remember what you mean by survival of the fittest, but you gave me an alternate notion of natural selection when I first asked. I want to see whether it's unfalsifiable on the basis of meaning, right? That's kind of what I'm interested in.
So I'm not familiar enough with like the philosophy to comment on.
It's not a philosophical issue right now, right? I just want to know what you mean by natural selection. That's all.
So natural selection is a mechanism of evolution, and through that mechanism, alleles. We'll use the modern terms that Darwin didn't have. Alleles that provide for a reproductive advantage increase in frequency within a population.
Yeah, I see a problem here. So let me make sure I understand you first, okay? You're saying that I tried to spell some of it out because I have a hard time regurgitating what people just say to me. So alleles that provide for a reproductive what? I'm going to put it in the
advantage. You have more. You have more offspring than average.
Okay. What was the last part of the clause?
What was it? Alleles
that provide for a reproductive advantage.
Reproductive advantage.
Okay.
Are more likely to increase in frequency within that population's gene pool over generations.
And that's what makes it seem like a tautology.
Which part?
Within a population, what?
The last part was over generations, because within individuals don't evolve, it's the population. So you need turnover generation to generation for evolution to happen.
Wait, okay. So, and this is my ignorance. So I just have a side question here. So if you have like a species of flowers, right, that have that you had this really incredible mutation, and 50% of the flowers the next day have thorns. Okay, and you can. I don't mind being interrupted. I don't have a problem.
So it wouldn't. So what? The idea is that you have an individual, right, that has a set of traits, and there's variation among the individuals in the population. Not that any individual is going to acquire new traits over their life.
Okay, but I understand that.
Right, okay, evolution and natural selection are distinctly two different theories. Is that what you're basically getting at?
So evolution is the broader idea. Natural selection is a mechanism of evolution.
Suppose it.
I mean, it's pretty well documented. I mean, you could document natural selection pretty readily. I mean, looking at,
the point is,
it's a supposed mechanism. It's a supposed mechanism of evolution.
I mean, I would call it a pretty well confirmed mechanism at this point. It's pretty well documented.
Okay, but going back to, just so I understand the theory, it seems like when in that case where overnight 50% of the flowers acquired thorns. I know that's not natural selection. Okay, right there.
Okay,
That might be that's a mutation that we can. It's a mutation, right?
Let's say,
mutation.
let's say hypothetical mutation where you have a population and then there's a mutation in some of the surface cells. So one of the plants now has.
No, let's just say 50% of the plants is an incredible event.
Just yeah, sure.
Right. Okay. It's something akin to like ABS. What happened and when life emerged from non-life. I don't really, a miracle, a scientific miracle. 50% of the population has thorns, right?
You can mutate the population. Yeah.
Simultaneously, a new species is introduced of birds or of a predator.
Yeah, it's
right.
Gonna eat it, right?
And then but then the ones that within that same generation, you have all the 50% of the non-thorns die off, and so you have 100%. You have a change in the frequency within the same generation, right? Mm-hmm. So you're telling me that's not natural selection?
No, that's very much natural selection.
But you see, that had nothing to do with over generations.
That was over. You just described it as over generations, where the next generation everybody has thorns.
No, but even in the parent generation, it changed to 100%.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Right. So you have a generation, right?
Right.
And then some members. So this is great. This is exactly what Darwin describes, going all the way back to 1858. Is you have a population, right? And part of Darwin's concept, and I apologize for going on about this. Part of the concept is this concept of overproduction, where you have more offspring in a generation,
right? Like a litter of cats. We had
so you get more born than are able to survive to adulthood due to things like competition and predation and whatever, right? So the kind of loss during the lifetime, that's technically not evolution because it's within a generation. And in order for the technical definition for evolution, not just by natural selection, but just in general, is changes in allele frequencies over generations.
Right. So if there was some, in Hitler's Germany, right, if he eliminated all the Jews, that really changes all the allele frequency, the allele frequency, but it wouldn't be evolutionary because it's not like a change I
don't care for the example, but right, it's within a generation, right?
I'm sorry for the. I'm going to use a different example.
Genocidal example.
I'm sorry. I'm a moral philosopher, so I use very horrible.
Yeah, I got it.
So if we just if we had someone, let's say in a particular location, if all the blonde people left to the planet Mars, right? Okay, that would change the gene frequency in that location, right? But we wouldn't say that's an evolutionary change, right? Is that kind of what you're saying?
The technical definition of evolution is change in allele frequency over generation. I'm sure John doesn't want me to share my screen anymore, but
yeah, but the point is that how is that not explanatory with respect to subsequent gene frequencies?
No, Danny, I think that if all of the blonde people went to Mars, then that would be considered natural selection because they all chose to do it.
Well, that's technically gene flow.
Yeah, that's gene flow. Yeah,
that's gene flow. That's a different mechanism. It's gene flow. It's migration.
But you would say that's an evolution. So then you wouldn't say natural selection explains subsequent frequencies from that. You would say gene flow.
There are lots of mechanisms, and natural selection is by no means sufficient to explain all evolution.
Okay, so the necessary conditions for natural selection is that there has to be at least two generations, right?
Yeah, that's part of the definition. Yeah, it's over generations.
Okay, so going back to your definition, and that was just a side point. I just wanted to make sure I understood. Okay, so alleles that provide for, you said, and I have it in that private chat, right? And please feel free to use the private chat. I have eyes on it.
Are more likely to increase in frequency over generate. Yeah, that's
okay. So if we're just talking about that, a case where the theory applies, supposedly, okay, then it seems like what advantage means there in that sentence depends on the increase of frequency over generations, right?
So specifically what we're talking about is, so that's the concept of evolutionary fitness. It's your reproductive success. And depending on the context, there's lots of ways to measure that. So like one common simple measure for like mammals, for example, is how many grandkids do you have? Because that means you had children and your children are able to reproduce. So that's like, okay, your genes are good, right?
Could you translate? I'm rewriting it right now, but we're going to break down the concept of advantage. So can you just define that? So I put alleles that provide for reproductive blank. What do I put?
Okay, so it's alleles that provide for a greater than average frequency of your offspring in the next generation.
Frequency in greater than average frequency for what offspring?
Of your own offspring.
Of offspring. Can I just say does the possessive matter there for offspring?
Yes, it does, because we're talking about your alleles, right? We're talking about alleles that provide for reproductive advantage, alleles that provide for a greater than average frequency of offspring in subsequent.
Okay, there it is. Okay, offspring.
Average reproductive output is 2, right? If you have an allele that it gives you an advantage, it makes your reproductive output 4 instead of 2, that confers a fitness advantage. So we would expect that allele to increase in frequency within that population over generations, because your kids who are going to get that allele are now greater than your share in the population.
Okay, so is it possible, right, that in the case where, we're bracketing all other mechanisms, that in a case where there's natural selection, alleles that provide for a smaller than average frequency of offspring are more likely to increase in frequency?
Yep.
Wait, but it has to be, if this is, maybe I have to think about it a little bit, but it seems like if I were to negate greater than average, so saying alleles that provide for a less than average frequency of offspring, it should still be possible that there are more likely to decrease in frequency.
They would be more likely to decrease in that scenario.
It wouldn't be, but why?
Because say if
no, sorry, I was asking Danny why what he said he thinks is true. Because if it's true that,
no, it's got to be possible.
It sounds like a proportional.
It's got to be possible. It's got to be possible, is what I'm trying to say.
By the way,
sure, but it's a proportional.
10:45. I'm going to jet because I do need to get to bed.
Okay,
another 5 or 10 minutes for me.
So no, the point is that alleles that provide for a greater than average frequency of offspring, that greater than average frequency can't be analytically attached to increase in frequency. If it is, go ahead.
Oh no, sorry.
Statistical.
If it is, then it's not possible that in the case where you're saying that there's natural selection counts as a mechanism, then it would be it wouldn't be possible that alleles that provide for a less than average frequency of offspring are more likely to still increase in frequency over generations.
They're right. So the alleles that provide for a lower than average frequency are going to decrease, a lower than average reproductive output. They're going to decrease in frequency over generations, is what we would expect.
Okay, I'll just think on this for a bit. I appreciate you, since you only have 5 minutes. It's not enough time for me.
I'll give you an example, right? So if you have a situation where you have 3 alleles, right? Or you got 3 alleles in a population, they're a third, a third, a third. Now, in this population, right, say one of them, we'll say my ring finger right here, we'll say that allele doubles your reproductive output. And my pointer, that allele, halves your reproductive output. Your middle finger doesn't matter, that's neutral. But if you get the ring finger allele, you're rocking. You're having twice as many kids as average. And if you get the pointer allele, tough luck, you're only having half as many kids. Now, in that generation, they're all going to have kids, right, according to whatever fitness they have, based on, in our example, these particular alleles. Now, in the next generation, who's going to have the most kids in that next generation? Well, the ring finger allele people are going to have the most kids. Therefore, there are going to be more people with that allele in the next generation. Instead of being a third, a third, a third, it's going to be higher than a third, and then the unfortunate pointer finger, that's going to be less than a third.
If I just to give a cursory response of kind of something at a glance, it just seems like that's necessarily true to me. But
that is kind of the math of it, yeah.
Well, then, if it's necessarily true, then I just think that all necessary truths are unfalsifiable.
Well, so can I give you an example of, so the reason it's falsifiable, and this is where I'll wrap it up. I'll just say this and then I'll jet. And John, thank you for the opportunity. This was a lot of fun. So the reason that concept is falsifiable is that all the stuff we were just talking about alleles, about frequencies, all that stuff, Darwin didn't know any of that when he proposed the idea along with Wallace in 1858. So as we were figuring out stuff with genetics and inheritance and DNA, all of those things were opportunities where, had we not found the thing that Darwin's theory predicts, then his idea would have been falsified at that point.
Yeah.
So had we, like, for example, looked at a population and found that there was no, even though there was phenotypic diversity, there was no heritable genetic diversity underlying that, poof, Darwin's idea explodes. Can't work.
Yeah, I still have a lot of questions. I think that, I think that this needs to be fleshed out way more than, even though we spent an hour on it. I put my email. I put my email now, just to have you know my background. I have a bachelor's in philosophy, and I'm getting my master's in philosophy.
Nice.
So I have a very different approach to these issues, right? I'm quite persuaded. Now, if you want to talk to me, I think Jerry Fodor has a persuasive argument against natural selection, but it has nothing to do with falsifiability. The charge of falsifiability is an independent argument that I'm presenting to you. And then the argument about the heart and the thump-thump noise, that argument comes from Jerry Fodor, right? And I think so there's two issues then for me, right? But if you ever want to talk about it, it would be great to get a scientist's perspective on a kind of philosophical objection.
Yeah, I think that would be a lot of fun. Correct me if I'm wrong, but Fodor, he's kind of along with I always forget the other guy's name, Pagliacci.
Yes. That guy. He wrote a book on what Darwin got wrong. Right? He's an atheist.
Yeah. The extended evolutionary. I got a lot of thoughts on the EES. Let me tell you, man.
Well, he wrote a book on what Darwin got wrong, right? So, I think if you want to look up the source,
look, but I put my email in the private chat. So if you want, we could shoot me an email. We can set something up. That would be a lot of fun.
Awesome. See ya.
All right. Have a good night, everybody. Argotha, never talked to you before, but that was super fun. So thank you. I appreciate it. And John, thanks for letting me come on and chat with everybody. That was fun. I wish you could have chatted more with us, but such is life. Night, everybody.
Night. It's Argotha, by the way. So, I don't think you ever really get to, like, you were just trying, this whole conversation, you were trying to prove a premise of your point.
Sorry, what were you saying?
This whole conversation, you were just trying to prove a premise of your point.
What was my girlfriend was talking to me. What premise were you, the premise that is falsifiable or unfalsifiable?
Right.
Yeah, well, there's that, but then he said stuff that actually had other issues, right? With the idea of an allele, like, with his ring finger, and then he had there was a neutral gene, and that's what I consider something to be like right along. So then there's like a secondary issue of like, what is it about natural selection that one is neutral and the other one's actually being selected for if they're in the case coextensive, right? That's the other objection that we have, right?
It's a tautology.
Well,
because the thing that you see reproducing, not necessarily the thing that you see growing in populations the most is the thing that is being naturally selected. It could be a statistical anomaly.
I think that's what explains why he can't appeal to natural selection. But I guess that's another avenue of showing that there's something wrong with the theory. If it's the case that we can't use it to differentiate what's being selected for versus what's just kind of junk traits.
I don't think that there's a problem with natural selection as a theory.
Well, if it's not explanatory, then that's a problem. Theories are explanatory.
It explains. I mean, okay. I guess what I really mean is,
guys. Unfortunately, I've got to get up very early, so I'm gonna have to wrap this one up. But
okay.
Appreciate everybody coming on, and Argotha, is that the right pronunciation? Argotha. Appreciate you. I think it's the first time you've been on, or if you haven't been on before, it's been a while, right?
By what?
Have you been on before?
No.
Okay. I thought it was your first time. I appreciate you coming on. You're welcome anytime. I'm going to try and do a after show tomorrow night after Sal's debate.
Who's he debating?
He's debating Matt Dillahunty.
Oh, I gotta watch that.
Before you go, can you send a link to the original debate from Brothers? I don't think it was in the chat.
Evolution
it
to
wasn't in
Facts.
the description for the YouTube video.
Yeah, let me see if I can find it.
Yo, what up? What up, Argo? Are you a Christian?
Look at his shirt.
Oh, I didn't see it. That's space. Without God, nothing matter. With God, nothing else matter. Yo, that's space.
Is that a tautology?
Do you accept the fact of evolution? No, I'm just kidding. Evolution's a fairy tale.
Okay, let's see. Okay, this was the original.
I was joking, but your response makes me think like you've got an argument.
All right, this was the conversation over on Dan's channel. But yeah, appreciate y'all coming. I'm extraordinarily exhausted, and I've got to wrap everything up here. I was gonna say something else. I was gonna close out with. What Danny, in context of what you're saying about the natural selection, it's not that natural selection isn't a realistic premise. It's whether or not it can actually be a driving force in the evolution of novel function.
No, I agree. I don't think.
And that's the whole piece of like, and this is why people like Danny Boy annoy the crap out of me, because he talks with such confidence that because from a mathematical standpoint, natural selection makes sense from an allele frequency, and which one ends up being, resulting in advantage from a reproduction perspective. Therefore, evolution is true.
No, I agree.
And I'm not saying that's what you're saying. I'm talking about the way Danny Boy presents the argument of.
He's also pretty long-winded.
And it's like, dude, this has absolutely nothing to do. Everything you're describing is pre-existing function. It requires the pre-existence of the allele that is supposedly providing this reproductive advantage. That allele already has to exist.
Yeah,
so the question is, how do these new things come?
Well, my last word here is, I mean, I don't get easily annoyed. I guess there's, like, when I start perceiving dishonesty, that's the only really case. But I don't. It seemed like at worst he's long-winded, but I can't stand dishonesty. But he didn't seem dishonest to me.
My problem was not that he was, well, it's a little bit that he was long-winded. It was more that he was saying kind of over and over something that he could have said, like, just make your point.
Yeah, I'm guilty of that too, though. I just can't stand dishonest people. But he didn't seem dishonest to me. But there might be other things for why I might be annoyed.
Dan likes to argue either at a very, very high level and not actually get into the nitty gritty of whether or not on the fundamentals his positions are remotely plausible, or on the flip side, argue something that is ridiculously myopic and ignores the big picture.
All right, I'll leave it at that. I have to help my girlfriend lift something. So,
all right, well, have a good night, Danny.
See ya.
Willfully ignorant.
Yeah. Well, man, so you're welcome anytime. We're trying to do another one tomorrow night. I'm going to have some more live streams later on this week. Everybody for coming in. I really appreciate y'all coming for this impromptu stream. When Otangelo told me he was talking with Dan tonight, I was debating back and forth whether or not I was going to do a stream, and then wrapped up some of the work stuff I was doing a little bit early and decided to hop on. But I got to get up at the butt crack of dawn in the morning, so I have got to call us one a night. Appreciate everyone, and even though tonight we allowed Dr. Dan to run his mouth and spew his confidence, I just want to encourage everybody to go look beyond the surface level of the talking points that he spews with such confidence. And so many of the YouTube atheists, they like to run around and pontificate about how all of their premises are proven beyond all doubt, but very often, if you go and look below the surface, you will find that they are walking on rapidly shattering glass, and very often they can't actually back up their own talking points when you go beneath the surface. So as you contemplate your own existence, make sure that the conclusions you reach are not just what you are told, but what you have researched for yourself, and that you ultimately come to what is the most logical, plausible, and probable conclusion about your existence. Have a great night, everybody.